Voting rights activists and organizers out of the state of Georgia decided to boycott President Joe Biden's speech on voting rights in Atlanta today. And I think they had a good reason for doing so. But rather than putting words in their mouths, why don't we hear from Cliff Albright, who is with Black Voters Matter? Listen to the harsh critique he has for President Biden in this clip.
We don't need another speech from the president. He gave a very passionate speech, not only the one that he gave for the commemoration last week of January 6th, but remember, he gave a very passionate speech back in Philadelphia, back in July. But then literally for 7 months, we heard nothing else about voting rights from him. And so now is not the time for another speech. And to be clear, we believe in using the presidency as a bully pulpit. We would have loved that the president used the presidency as a bully pulpit for the past 7, 8 months while we've been fighting for voting rights, even getting arrested outside of the White House, begging him to do so. But at this point, we don't need another speech. We don't need him to come to Georgia and use us as a prop. What we need is work. And we're out working too, because there are attacks going on against Georgia voters and Georgia organization happening right now.
I have to say that statement was it was a relief to hear it. It was cathartic because far too often the Democratic Party, Democratic leadership, in this case, President Joe Biden, claim that they're gonna fight for certain things and then fail to do so. And then some of the more avid supporters expect you to fall in line and support them during midterm elections, during general elections, despite their failures. And here you have, Cliff Albright, who uses the word props. We don't want to be used as props. And I think it's important to really send that message to not just the Biden administration, but to the Democratic Party that seems to think that it's totally okay to take votes from certain demographics for granted. And it's also something that I want to bring up in the context of the last general election, because despite the, horrendous one and only term of the Trump administration, and despite all of the terrible rhetoric, divisive rhetoric that would come out of that man's mouth, he actually increased his vote among the Black electorate. And Democrats are like, well, we don't know why that happened. Why did that happen? Could it be that the Democratic Party has taken the Black vote for granted for quite some time now? And there are consequences to that, Cenk, something that you talk about quite often.
Yeah, so first on Cliff Albright, I just have 2 words: preach it. That was just picture perfect. I love that he added, look, we're not against using the bully pulpit. We're totally in favor of that, but stop with the endless photo ops. Do something, for God's sake, do something. And Democrats for the last 40 years have substituted marketing for actual action. And they've been aided and abetted by corporate media. But these days, media is mixed, right? Before they had a complete monopoly. Now, social media tears them apart, rightfully so. And they catch all sorts of feelings. But it's harder to do that against these groups. So when these groups come out and say, yeah, we're tired of your nonsense excuses, it's harder for them to go, oh my God, these progressives are terrible. Media, just ignore them, right? Well, you can't do that. So I love that Cliff Albright and others had the courage to do this. And honestly, more than that, like, it's great, but their frustration is palpable and appreciated.
And we're gonna hear from many other people as well who share that frustration. But I wanna go to the second part of this interview with Cliff Albright, because he was read an excerpt from the speech that Joe Biden gave today. And I was curious to see what his reaction to that would be. Let's watch.
Let me just read once again what he is going to say today. The next few days, when these bills come to a vote, will mark a turning point in this nation. Will we choose democracy over autocracy, light over shadow, justice over injustice? I know where I stand. I will not yield. I will not flinch. I will defend your right to vote in our democracy against all enemies, foreign and domestic. So the question is, where will the institution of the United States Senate stand? What more could he do?
Well, a couple of things he could do. One is that we need him not only to give that speech and to talk about the filibuster and to give a clear plan. It's one thing for you to say, I'm open to filibuster changes, right? That's what he said up until now. He has not given a full-throated call for them to modify the filibuster. He's not yet done what he did for infrastructure. When he went to Congress and met with the members of the House, he didn't go to those members and say, you know what, I'm open to infrastructure. If infrastructure is necessary, I can go along with that. What he said was pass this bill and pass it now. He's not done that in regards to voting rights.
Now, of course, the bipartisan infrastructure bill was favored by some Republicans in Congress, but more importantly, by corporations. And so that, of course, took priority in regard to passage of any legislation. But I love what he said there. I think this was such a great interview, and it was so important to hear these frustrations and for activists and organizers on the issue of voting rights to vocalize the concerns they have about Biden and whether or not he's really fighting for voting rights. Look, it's not good enough for Biden to just simply say like, oh, I support doing away or reforming the filibuster. He said the same thing about his own social spending bill, the Build Back Better agenda. Did he fight for it? Doesn't look like it. That legislation is done with. It's been shelved. Did he use any sticks as opposed to carrots in regard to dealing with Kyrsten Sinema and Joe Manchin? Of course he didn't. All he had was complimentary commentary about them whenever reporters asked about where Build Back Better was. But on the topic of the voting rights bill, yeah, how the hell would that pass unless you actually have a plan in place to do away with the filibuster, have a carve out for the filibuster or for the Voting Rights Act, or reform the filibuster? He has no plan. He hasn't specified what he plans to do. He just, in his speech today, simply said that he's in favor of reforming it so there could be passage for voting rights. It's just, It's so sad and it's so boring at this point, and everyone can see through it.
Yeah, so understand that the only reason we're doing this story is because of the opposition. Because Joe Biden restating his theoretical agenda that he doesn't give a damn about is not news. It's BS marketing that the rest of the press covers as if it's real. Pass it or don't pass it. Don't tell me about how you're kind of trying to pass it. And Cliff Albright is my new favorite person because it was such a great answer. When it was the corporate-backed infrastructure bill, Joe Biden was up in people's business. I mean, he was threatening progressives significantly behind the scenes. I'm very aware of that, right? Man, when it comes to progressives, Joe Biden can fight. I mean, all of a sudden he remembers the corn pop days, right? But when it comes to voting rights and sticking up for not just his most loyal voting base, but my God, African Americans that have been that need this. But by the way, all of us need it, right? And for democracy, can't be found, missing in action. So I love that Albright's not having any of it. I'll give Berman for doing the credit. I appreciate that. It's a rare thing to see in corporate media. At the same time, I mean, it's such a classic CNN news anchor. Like, what more could Biden do? I mean, what do you guys want? This guy has already said words. Empty words have been said and you're still not satisfied?
Now, as much as we love and appreciate Cliff Albright, he is not the only voting rights activist who is voicing his concerns about the Biden administration and the lack of action in getting the passage for that bill. I want to read a few quotes, starting with Phi Nguyen, who is the executive director of Asian Americans Advancing Justice Atlanta. He addressed the president and vice president saying, quote, "We beg you to stay in Washington tomorrow." This was a quote from yesterday, "because we don't need you here in Georgia." Well, Biden didn't listen. He did travel to Atlanta to give the speech. He continues to say, "We need legislation that will ensure that our democracy accurately reflects the growing diversity of this state and of this country. Mr. President and Madam Vice President, we beg you to ground that plane the same way that we continue to beg you to ground the planes of so many of our community members who are being deported because we still lack a pathway to citizenship." I like that comment because he killed two birds with one stone there. He not only called out the Biden administration for its inaction on voting rights, but also drew attention to the fact that in regard to immigration policy, there has been virtually no change from what we experienced under the Trump administration. And I want to go to one more video here. This is actually a snippet from an interview you did, Cenk, with Reverend Green. And I thought the framing of your question was perfect. So let's take a quick look at that.
Did you ever think that you would have to go on a hunger strike to get President Biden to do the bare minimum that he promised during the campaign?
No, I did not think. As soon as the president was elected, he said that he would have our back. He's speaking to African Americans on the night of his election. He said, "I would have your back." And here we are, years later, a year later, waiting on the president to have our back, waiting on the president to stand firm as the president to address the nation in the midst of the civil war that we're finding ourselves in, which is a crisis of our democracy. And so we have been waiting long enough. And so we hope that at this moment that the president would hear the voice of moral leadership that is crying out like blood cries out from the ground, willing and hoping for a transformation and to protect our social democracy.
And just to reiterate, this isn't about the president giving enough speeches on the issue. It's about putting action behind his words. Simply saying that he supports something or simply saying that he wants to reform the filibuster clearly doesn't go far enough in ensuring that we do what's necessary to protect voting rights in this country.
Yeah, so Reverend Green, by the way, is the head of the Black faith leaders, and 25 of them, including Reverend Green, are on a hunger strike right now. So you've got Black Voters Matter, you got faith leaders in the Black community all saying, I've had enough. We've all had enough of empty promises from Democrats who only deliver for their donors and never deliver for their voters. Guys, you have to understand, I thought $15 minimum wage was the bare minimum. I assumed they would do voting rights. I assumed they would strip out their anti-corruption parts and at least do voting rights. If they're not even gonna do that, and they haven't in over a year, and that means they're, let's put it this way. You shouldn't take anything a Democratic leader says seriously until they prove otherwise. When you hear them speaking, you should assume they're lying because that has been their track record definitively over the last 40 years. So enough of their crap, pass something, otherwise shut up already.
And I want to give credit to a few other people before we wrap up this story. Let's go to the last graphic here. So family members of Martin Luther King Jr. have also spoken out. Last month, for instance, Martin Luther King III, his wife, Waters King, and their daughter, Yolanda Renee King, called for no celebration of MLK Day without the passage of voting rights legislation. So even they're speaking out, and I love to see it because really, if we don't apply pressure, we're not gonna see any change. We're gonna continue seeing inaction by the Biden administration and Democratic leadership. And really, guys, the point that, I wanna buttress Cenk's point about Democrats lying. Listen, whatever piece of legislation they introduce or try to promote is completely irrelevant unless they have a plan in place to either reform or do away with the legislative filibuster in the Senate, which requires 60 senators to vote in favor of something in order for it to pass. If they don't have a plan in place for that, then I'm not interested in hearing what their proposals are. I know and they know that those proposals are going nowhere, and I'm not interested in doing positive marketing for them when they don't really have a real plan in place.
Yeah, and we have to keep clarifying that because in American media, corruption is so significant that if you're not doing marketing for one party or another, people look at you like, wait, are you guys journalists? I mean, how come you're not doing marketing for one of the parties in the system? No, you morons, you're supposed to challenge them. You're supposed to afflict the comfortable. You're supposed to question them. And they haven't done any of that. By the way, I'll give more shout outs to the good guys though. Ben Jealous, who's now head of the People for the American Way, former head of Dublin, NAACP, League of Women Voters. They're out there getting arrested, doing civil disobedience to get the Democrats to do the bare minimum. Their donors are now rich with trillions of dollars in pork. But still, as they gorge on all of that, they can't do the bare minimum for their voters. Anyone who's not telling you that they're liars is part of the problem. And you can know it definitively because there are things like that Biden can take executive action on that he clearly promised, like getting rid of $10,000 in student debt, that he's choosing not to do. He doesn't have the Manchin excuse. He doesn't have the parliamentarian excuse. I bring that example to you guys so you understand both in voting rights and everything he's talking about. It's not that he can't do it, it's that he doesn't want to do it. He was lying all along.
Thanks for watching the Young Turks. Really appreciate it. Another way to show support is through YouTube memberships. You'll get to interact with us more. There's live chat emojis, badges. You've got emojis of me, Anna, John, JR. So those are super fun. But you also get playback of our exclusive member-only shows and specials right after they air. So all of that, all you gotta do is click that join button right underneath the video. Thank you.